Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
Today on CityCast Houston, we hope everyone is staying safe with this winter snowstorm. HISD and other schools are closed, as well as Bush and Hobby airports. City officials are urging people to stay off the roads until the temperatures warm up and the snow and ice melt later this week, so please stay hunkered down. We'll have the latest news regarding the winter snowstorm at houston.citycast.fm and also in our newsletter, Hey Houston. For today, we're bringing you an episode that's essential for our city's economy and immigrant communities. Almost as soon as Donald Trump was sworn in as president, he signed several sweeping executive orders on immigration, from sending troops to the border to trying to end birthright citizenship. I wanted to know how Trump's crackdown could impact Houston, home to so many immigrants, including undocumented immigrants. So I'm bringing on Houston Landing's immigration reporter, Anna Kat Brigida. It's Tuesday, January 21st. I'm Rahil Ramzanali, and here's what Houston's talking about. Hey, Anna Kat, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to talk to you because there is a lot to dive into regarding immigration policies and how it's going to impact the city. But before we jump into it all, I want to ask you, in your years of covering immigration and also covering it here in Houston and in Texas, what do you think is the biggest myth about immigration in Texas?
Well, I think there's a lot of myths. I think that the biggest one is just that as politicians talk about immigration, I think there's a lot of lack of understanding of what that system actually looks like. And anyone who's gone through the system knows that it's incredibly complex, very difficult to get a visa to the US, very difficult to legalize your status once you get here. And the way it's kind of talked about by politicians makes it seem like there's maybe a magic wand that kind of can just get rid of a lot of these issues. But it's actually just a very complicated and intricate system.
I'm glad you brought that up. And I don't know if the politicians also understand how costly it is to become a legal citizen of the United States. My family went through that process many, many years ago, right? We became naturalized citizens in 2007. But the process took us so many years and it cost us so much money, right? Because there are just so many fees. You've got to hire a lawyer. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. And being an immigrant family, I think people forget how expensive it is, how hard it is. And when things become even more challenging, it just takes a toll on you that I can't even put into words.
Yeah, exactly. So many fees, so many parts of the process. And, some people try to avoid getting a lawyer because they think, oh, I'll just do it myself. But it is so complicated that sometimes you do need that lawyer who can help you through the process. But it all costs money.
Absolutely. And, we know Houston is very diverse, but let's start with this, right? Can you tell me just how many immigrants live in the greater Houston area and how important they are to our city and communities?
So about 26% of Harris County residents are foreign born. And, we have a very diverse immigrant population. So some of the biggest immigrant populations that we have in this area, Mexican, Central American, Vietnamese, more recent arrivals from Venezuela, Cuba, many different countries. And I think this is something that as Houston residents, we all kind of see in our day-to-day lives. The most obvious one is we got a lot of good food here.
Of course.
Everybody knows probably that you can get some good arepas in Katy, Venezuelan food, and all the different cuisines that all these different immigrant populations have to offer. But besides that, it's just a part of our community, our neighbors. I think that one thing I really like about living in Houston is I think that most Houston residents know that diversity is just part of our culture. And I do think people here don't have that fear necessarily of of people coming from other countries just because, we know so many people.
It's part of us.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing to be worried about.
Within that number, I want to dial in. How many are undocumented right now?
So in the Houston area, we do have about 500,000 undocumented immigrants. So those can be people who arrived recently. It can be people who've been here for many years and just have never had a chance to legalize their status, don't have a pathway to citizenship. It can even be some people who have legal statuses such as DACA, dreamers, as they're called, people who came here as children. So that includes a big portion of people and people with different statuses that are not considered legal permanent residents.
And this is where things get really, really sad for me, right? Throughout the entire campaign cycle, we heard President Trump talk about one of the big things he's going to focus on was that mass deportations are going to happen. And he has not backed down from that. What would a mass deportation campaign in Houston look like?
Yeah, so when we're talking about mass deportations, I really encourage people to think about it not just as one singular event or one singular policy. It's really going to be something that is rolled out and continues to intensify throughout the Trump administration. And it's also important to remember that a lot of these systems are already in place. So mass deportations, I think what comes to some people's mind is thinking about big raids and kind of big showy things like potentially going to a workplace and ICE picking up a lot of different people. And that could be possible in the Houston area, but it could also just look like targeting a lot of individuals. It's going to look like probably more people going through the immigration court system and eventually getting a deportation order. Right now, there's some efforts to get some people out of immigration court so that they don't get that final deportation order, particularly people who have U.S. citizen children, who have no criminal record. And we're really going to see that the Trump administration is just going after all of these different people. Detention centers are going to have to ramp up. We already do have 4 detention centers in the Houston area, the 2 biggest that are in Conroe. So we could see an expansion of that system, both in Houston and throughout Texas.
Yeah, you're right. Like immediately when we think about mass deportations, we're thinking about these big events, but there are many programs. So let's jump into some of those. First of all, tell people about immigration courts, because if you're not following this every single day, that's something that we don't know about. What is immigration court and why would they be targeted?
Yeah, that's a good point. As an immigration reporter, I do spend some time in immigration court, but not everyone is necessarily familiar with it. So for people who are facing potential deportation, so they're going to have to go through immigration court. A lot of those people are going to be probably seeking an asylum case. And that can take 5 to 10 years. It's a very long process.
Wow.
And yeah, there's just such a backlog now that these cases are taking a lot longer. I think nationwide, the immigration court backlog is now more than 3.5 million cases. In Houston has 3 immigration courts and there's about 100,000 cases. So when people go through that process, if at the end a judge says, hey, we've decided that you can't stay here in the US, then they will have a deportation order and they will be prioritized for being sent back to their countries.
How would things look like at the jail, right? Like, could President Trump use local jails and federal agents to speed up deportations of people who are accused of crimes or committed crimes?
Yeah, definitely. President Trump is pushing for more cooperation with law enforcement. Currently, in Harris County, the Harris County Sheriff's Office does not have an agreement that's called a 287G agreement. I know that's a little bit of a wonky term, but basically that's an information sharing agreement with ICE. They do share some information, though. That's kind of one specific program, but there are other ways that they can share information. So there are people who do get picked up from Harris County Jail and who get picked up by ICE. That is something that could be continuing. And it does really depend on our local officials to decide how much they want to cooperate with that or not.
One last thing on the layers of mass deportations, right? You recently had a story about Colony Ridge in Liberty County. It's been so politicized already. Could it be one of the first targets of an immigration crackdown?
Well, we don't know exactly, where Trump will target, but I've been speaking to many advocates, many lawyers, and many of them do think that in the first week there will be some sort of show of force or some kind of flashy raid or some sort of immigration enforcement activity. And it could very likely be at some sort of location that has been very public, that has been the focus of a lot of this conversation. And Colony Ridge, we've seen it time and time again that both local and state and national politicians have talked about Colony Ridge as this issue, which I do just want to stress, that a lot of their rhetoric is very exaggerated and doesn't really reflect what's going on there in terms of just, they're focusing on it as a hotbed of crime, which is not fully justified.
Life and Death on the Border 1910 to 1920 is now on view at Holocaust Museum Houston from January 24th to May 25th. This groundbreaking exhibition is produced by the Bullock Texas State History Museum in collaboration with Refusing to Forget, and it explores a decade of hardship, conflict, and state-sanctioned violence along the Texas border that threatened to destroy a community. But this decade also led to a cultural renaissance along the border and beyond, and it inspired the Mexican-American civil rights movement. Life and Death on the Border 1910 to 1920 will be on view in Holocaust Museum Houston's Joseph and Edith Mintzberg Gallery, January 24th through May 25th. Admission is always free for ages 18 and under and college students with a valid school ID, and it's also free to everyone Thursdays from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Learn more at hmh.org/lifeanddeath. Look, there's no place like Texas, except when it comes to skiing or my personal favorite, snowboarding. And I get it, you're heading to snowier pastures, but before you leave Texas, grab one last taste of the real Texas in Amarillo. If you love a good Texas road trip like me, then Amarillo needs to be on the top of your list because it's quirky, wild, western, and a spontaneous city. I mean, where else can you spray paint a Cadillac, cruise down Route 66, and even find that perfect cowboy or cowgirl hat for rodeo season? Here's a pro tip for me. If you're driving to a ski destination, make sure you stop at Palo Duro Canyon right outside of Amarillo and hike in the second largest canyon in the US. Heck, I think you should stop on the way back as well because of how amazing it is. After that hike, be sure to carb load on some Tex-Mex and then pop into a speakeasy in Amarillo and grab a well-deserved drink. The mountains may be calling, but Amarillo will make you proud to call Texas home. Start planning your trip to Amarillo at visitamarillo.com and après ski into the real Texas. I want to zoom out now and go to Texas, our state, right? And we've already seen Governor Greg Abbott here in Texas ramp up a lot of immigration enforcement. First, can you recap what he's done and then how Texas could help President Trump on immigration in this second term?
Yeah, Texas has already been a very active partner in terms of immigration enforcement. So we have Operation Lone Star in the state since 2021. I think they've spent about $11 billion on that. And that is basically cooperation between law enforcement and ICE. So it is a bit focused at the border. And arresting people who cross the border, on a lot of them on trespassing charges. Then they're taken to jail and then picked up by ICE. But there's kind of a machine that is already in place in Texas to facilitate these mass deportations.
And again, I want to talk to you about families that have mixed immigration status. And what I mean by that are where the parents could be undocumented, but the kids were born here in the US and are American born citizens. How do you think Trump will treat those families when it comes to deportation?
Well, I think he's made it very clear in his rhetoric that he does not really care about keeping families together. We've seen a little bit during the Biden administration that they tried to prioritize, for example, if there's a parent of a U.S. citizen going through immigration court, they try to take that into consideration. And if those people do not have a criminal record, try not to prioritize those people. And Trump has said that he basically doesn't care. His administration has not ruled out another family separation policy, which family separation referring to the policy of forcefully separating children from their parents when they were crossing the border. He has not ruled that out, but family separation can look like so many different things. Like you mentioned, so many families in Houston where a parent, sibling could be undocumented and other people in the family could have status. And really, that's not going to be taken into consideration in terms of mass deportations.
Wow. 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 I know as we think about this potential move from the administration, how are immigration advocacy groups preparing for all of this? How are families preparing for this, right? There's just so much uncertainty and so much fear.
Yeah, there definitely is a lot of fear among immigrants right now. One thing that I'm hearing a lot is that immigration advocates don't want to scare people too much and don't want to scare people into thinking certain things are already happening. It's important to know what's happening and what might come. But right now, we're kind of waiting to see exactly how these policies will play out. But one thing that they're advising a lot of families is if there is someone who is undocumented, is at risk of ICE enforcement or being detained, make sure that that person, has all of their documents somewhere, has their keys, a spare key somewhere so other people can get into the house or into the car. These are things that come up if someone is, picked up from their workplace and then no one else can get into the house. So things like that, like prepare for the worst, know who's going to pick your kids up from school if you can't do that. Unfortunately, you do have to think through the worst case scenario while also hoping for the best.
Oh my gosh, that breaks my heart. But yeah, you just have to be prepared, right? You never know. I want to move to businesses, right? How are they preparing? Because one reason why these hardline policies are such a big deal in Houston and in Texas is that, as we mentioned, undocumented immigrants are a big part of our workforce. They're a big part of our community, roughly 8% or 1.6 million people across Texas. How will these policies impact our industries like construction? Could we see a labor shortage?
Well, one thing I've been hearing a lot in terms of some of the pushback against mass deportations, especially from the business community and from some people who might consider themselves to be fiscally conservative, is that mass deportations are going to be very bad for the economy. It could cost up to $315 billion. And a lot of the people who are going to be targeted are working in key industries. So, for example, in Houston, working in construction. And I know everybody complains about, housing prices. Houston is known as a little more affordable city in the nation, but, you could see if there's less building happening, then housing prices going up. So there's a lot of impacts that we could see in terms of what we're paying for if we don't have those workers anymore, what that's going to look like in our day-to-day lives.
All right. So tariffs potentially, right? Labor shortage potentially. Cool. Just cool stuff there. It's just going to be interesting for our economy.
Do you plan your vacations based on whether you can speak the local language? With Babbel, language no longer has to be the barrier. I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast, and I went to Mexico City a couple of years ago with my girlfriend, who's a native Spanish speaker, so I just let her do all the talking, like all of it. I adored the city, and now I'm going to go back in a couple of months, but with my college roommates, who are a bunch of middle-aged men, none of us Spanish speakers. When I was younger, I might not have been bold enough to do that, but now I'm not anxious because Babbel has me covered. Thanks to Babbel, I know how to order a taxi, how to give directions, how to order in a restaurant, all the small and useful bits of language that make international travel easier. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons, handcrafted by over 200 language experts, get you to begin speaking your new language in 3 weeks or whatever pace you choose. And because conversing is the key to really understanding each other in a new language, Babbel is designed using practical, real-world conversations, especially the sort you need while traveling. Food, how to get places. Babbel's tips and tools are inspired by the real-life stuff you actually need when communicating. With a focus on conversation, you'll be ready to talk wherever you go. So I hope I'll see you in Mexico in a couple of months. Or, as we say, espero verte en Mexico en un par de meses. So let's get more of you talking in a new language. Babbel is gifting CityCast listeners 60% off subscriptions at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Babbel.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Build a routine with Ollie that supports your wellness needs, like getting your daily vitamins and minerals with Ollie's multi-gummies, or keeping your mood upbeat with all the vitamin D in Hello Happy. Give your gut health some support with probiotics, and wake up feeling refreshed after taking Ollie Sleep. Do wellness on your terms. Find Ollie at a Walmart or Target near you or at ollie.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Let's get to another group that's vulnerable under Trump's second administration, and that's the Dreamers. And if you don't know who Dreamers are, they're people who came to the U.S. as children. They've grown up here and are protected from deportation through the program known as DACA. Can you remind listeners how this program works and how many Houstonians it protects roughly?
So DACA stands for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program. Basically, if you were brought as a child and you've lived most of your life in the U.S., you can qualify for DACA. Unfortunately, it has been going through a lot of legal challenges. So right now, there are about 27,000 DACA recipients in Houston, but DACA does not accept any new applicants because it's been on pause because Texas and 8 other states sued to try to end the program. So the program has very much been in limbo. The 27,000 people who have DACA here, they are able to renew their status every 2 years, but they're kind of in a period of uncertainty. And another important thing to remember about DACA is that it does not provide a pathway to citizenship. So I think that's a common misconception is a lot of people think, oh, maybe someone has had DACA for 10 years. DACA has been around since 2012. And then they can eventually become a citizen. And through DACA, they cannot do that. Some of those people might have a U.S. citizen spouse or even a child, because some of them are into their 40s now, and might have some way to legalize their status through a family member or maybe work sponsorship. But just through DACA, that has not been possible.
What are the chances that DACA survives this administration?
Well, DACA has been a somewhat interesting issue because Trump did try to end DACA during his first presidency, but some of his rhetoric around DACA has been a little bit contradictory. So he has even suggested that he might try to work with Congress for a solution to DACA. That might sound a little bit unlikely for him, but I think one important thing to remember about DACA and about Dreamers is that it's one of the populations that politically the majority of people are on board with those people being able to become citizens. So politically, it actually is very controversial if Trump tried to end DACA again, and it could actually be politically popular if he tried to provide a pathway to citizenship for them.
Gotcha.
It's a little difficult to believe he would help immigrants, but that is one policy that he has kind of gone back and forth on. So it's a little bit unclear.
When I think about DACA, what does it mean for Houstonians who are DACA recipients, right? As you mentioned, there are recipients now in their 30s and 40s, and, some are teachers and community advocates. They are important people in our communities right now. Like, what would it mean if that program is stripped or is changed drastically?
Yeah, I think one of the things about DACA as well is that because all of these people have been here for so long, many people do not perceive them as immigrants. They see
Mhm.
how they speak English perfectly, see that they just seem like, the average Houstonian, how a lot of them have gone to college here. And you really might have someone in your life who has DACA and you don't know it because you never really thought about it.
That's so crazy, right? And speaking of college, like I recently learned about this program because I didn't know, but with DACA, a lot of recipients qualify for in-state tuition to colleges like UT, Texas A&M, and that was put in by former Republican Rick Perry, by the way, who was a big champion. Kind of just, you look back and go, wow, the GOP party has changed so much. You think that benefit goes away?
Well, I think, as I said, attacking DACA is very unpopular. So if there's anything that Republicans might kind of take a step back from, I do think that is one thing. And also, as you mentioned, that did go through the Texas legislature. And I think anything that went through either Texas legislature or through Congress, those are more difficult things to attack. It would take a more coordinated kind of political attack against those to reverse it. So I think that is something that I'm a little less worried about. And maybe just to take a step back and explain a little bit of immigration policy and how some things are changed very quickly. A lot of policy is determined through executive orders because there has been gridlock in Congress. And so those are the types of things that are really quickly can change. But things like, in-state tuition for DACA recipients, that would take a lot more time for that to change.
There's another immigration policy that you've reported on that tries to give a legal pathway to migrants from 4 countries, Cuba, Venezuela, Haiti, and Nicaragua. And it seems like it's really about humanitarian aid. Tell me about this program, and do you think it would continue under Trump?
Well, I think to take a step back a little bit and to talk about Biden's approach to immigration. So the Biden administration took this approach thinking that, people are coming to the US border because there's things happening in their countries. For example, Venezuela, one of the biggest mass migrations. 8 million people have left Venezuela, I think, since 2014, and many of them are coming to the US. And so the idea was that, if people have a legal pathway, then they might avoid taking that very dangerous journey through all of Central America and Mexico to the US border. And so he created this program for Cubans, Venezuelans, Haitians, and Nicaraguans so they can get a sponsor, come to the US legally on something called parole. And that did actually help to decrease the number of people coming through the border.
Okay.
But as I mentioned, in terms of executive orders, that was done through executive authority. And so that is something that can be reversed very quickly. So I do think that very quickly we are going to see that program will not exist anymore, and many other legal avenues that the Biden administration tried to open up.
Wow. So a program that worked could be stripped immediately. Interesting. Interesting.
Make it make sense.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking the same thing. All right. We'll see what happens with that one. On the flip side, President Trump has said many times that he does love immigrants that are here legally. I mean, for crying out loud, Elon Musk, who's one of his right-hand people now, is originally from South Africa. Do you think his administration will make it easier to obtain visas, green cards, and the pathway to become a citizen?
I'm not sure that he will try to make that easier. I think going back to your original question in terms of misconceptions, I think that one of the things that's thrown around a lot in terms of immigration is, people should come the legal way, people should come the right way. But the US immigration system is actually so restrictive, and that is not really possible. There's backlogs for years or even a decade or more to do a family petition and things like that. And I just don't see how Trump would try to open up those legal pathways. Maybe a little bit for skilled workers. I know that Elon Musk kind of came under fire as he advocated for that specific visa for skilled workers. Yeah. But I think the reaction to that showed that many people in the Republican Party are not really open to any legal immigration at all.
It's going to be an interesting next 4 years. It's going to be interesting next few weeks, next days. But anything else that you think people need to know or understand about this complex issue and how President Trump's new administration can impact Houston?
So we're already in week one. We're seeing a lot of activity around immigration and immigration policy, but this is really just the beginning. And so we should really be watching all of the policies, how they change incrementally and how they start to expand and target more people. And I do think that there is some idea that maybe only a certain group of people, only a certain group of criminals is going to be targeted. And I don't necessarily think that that's the right way to think through it. I think all the rhetoric has shown that it's going to be targeting immigrants in general. Both people are here and making it more difficult for people to come.
Yeah, that's my last piece of advice too. Don't forget about the human element in all of this, right? These aren't just stories that we see on the news. These aren't just talking points. These are actual people. And it's heartbreaking to see, but we'll see what happens here with President Trump. Anna Kat, thank you again for joining us and educating us on all of these different layers. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
That was Anna Kat Brigida. I've linked her work at the Houston Landing in our show notes. Before we go, a lot is going to happen under this new administration, so please subscribe to the podcast as we break it all down. And share this episode with 3 friends who want to know how Washington will impact Houston. Before you close your podcast app, drop us a rating and review as well. We also have a lot more news and moments of joy every day here at CityCast Houston and our daily newsletter, Hey Houston, which you can sign up for at houston.citycast.fm. That will do it for today. I'm Rahil Ramzanali. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something new.